Hello, and welcome to this lecture entitled Historiography and the Literature Review. Although the words historiography and literature review mean different things, historians use them interchangeably when discussing the required section of your paper that places your research question and claim into the context of how other historians address that same topic. The historiography or literature review is the fourth and final product of gathering and reading sources for their interpretations. It's the end point of the other products, the annotated bibliography, the reflective memo, and the concept saturation Excel dump. Again, the literature review, also called a historiography, is a distinct section of your paper in which you engage with other historians on your topic. But before we get there, let's back up and examine what we mean by the difference in the terms historiography and literature review. As I said earlier, historians use the word historiography interchangeably with literature review when talking about that specific section of research papers. But another meaning for the word historiography is the grand theories or schools of historical interpretation. Of course, each school of interpretation exists in the writings of historians, that is, the historical literature on that topic. By school or grand theory, we mean how historians group themselves around ideas about historical events or philosophies about how history works. That is historical interpretation. When in a very early lecture, I insisted that history concerns human events, I identified myself as a member of the humanist school of history that stretches back to the Enlightenment and even earlier. Other, usually much earlier historians thought of change on earth as divine intervention and are called members of the providential school of history. Other schools of history you've heard of include the Marxist school that posits that historical change is based on ownership of the means of production to overly reduce this complex theory. Another school is postmodernism, in which postmodern historians argue that change is impossible to describe over time because of the inherent flaws in the sources themselves. This goes on and on. That's one definition of historiography, and it can be its own field of study. But there's also the historical literature review on a subject, a topic, or a specific theme. These appear in books, which we often call monographs, journal articles, and various forms of digital writings that conform to the monographic, journal article, academic style, as well as being peer-reviewed. Historical literatures offer varying interpretations of the subject or the topic. Let's look at an example. Take the period in U.S. history we call Reconstruction. One early group of scholars called the Dunning School for William Archibald Dunning of Columbia University argued that U.S. Reconstruction was a grave mistake that deliberately harmed the U.S. South by elevating the formerly enslaved to positions they could not handle. And it was up to the former Confederates, called Redeemers, to do the right thing and reimpose white rule. That's the Dunning School, and many writers wrote on the Dunning School. This was the orthodox interpretation for a long time, until another school arose beginning about 1955 with a book by Kenneth Stamp and was picked up a generation later by Eric Foner. This new school, the Stamp-Foner school, claimed that Reconstruction was not awful like the Dunningites claimed, and that the so-called redemption and reestablishment of white rule stopped a revolution in democracy in U.S. society as well as in U.S. politics. These are two very different takes on the same subject area. They are both schools of interpretation, and the writings form the literature on the topic. What the historical literature on a particular topic shows is the ongoing conversation among historians and scholars who respond to one another by noting where their own claims fit in with those who came before, either by agreeing, by disagreeing, or agreeing with a difference. They also might find a gap in the previous literature. In writing your own literature review, you should enter that conversation. But since we, your readers, don't know who you've read, nor do we know who influenced you most, nor do we know what your sources said, you have to tell us what they said before telling us what you say. It's a bit like a presenter taking questions from an audience who doesn't use microphones. The presenter repeats the question so everyone can hear it before the presenter opines on it. One part of your entering that ongoing scholarly conversation is to find where your research fits. Do you agree with a particular interpretation? Do you disagree with a particular interpretation? Do you agree with a difference? Maybe you see where your sources haven't talked about a topic, or have talked about it, but so minimally that you know that they've all but ignored it. That's an opening too. You found a gap in the literature. Be careful though. Without extensive experience and reading, you might think you found a gap, but you've not read enough to have yet discovered other historians who have indeed talked about your topic. If you're not sure, present that gap with humility, as if you might be wrong. Let's talk about how you present your engagement with other scholars. Think of the ongoing scholarly conversation like the image of people conversing around a water cooler you see on this slide. What would you do if you joined them? Would you immediately jump into the conversation to talk about what you thought? Or would you listen to them, then engage their ideas, sometimes even adding your own twist or moving the conversation toward things that you would like to talk about? One trick that you can be helped by are the templates for academic language offered by Graf and Birkenstein in their book, They Say, I Say, The Moves That Matter in Academic Writing. I did not recommend this book for purchase for this class, but I have copied a couple of chapters for your exclusive use, and they will help you by allowing you to access language to get involved in presenting what other people say, in disagreeing, agreeing with a difference, filling a gap, that is engaging these other sources, and in presenting what you say in response to these other sources. How do you go about finding the existing literature to engage in your literature review? That is, what other historians have written. Also, are there pre-made historiographies on certain topics? If you've done your reading, you've done some of this, because you've instilled into your annotated bibliographies, then reflective memos, then concept saturation, Excel dumps, the interpretations that you've gotten from other sources. These are the books and the articles on your topic that you have already examined for their interpretations. Generally, these sources have their own literature review section, even if it's a bit tough to find them. Remember, look in the introduction, and you might see that they talk about what previous historians have written on the topic. You can then find those sources and look at them for their interpretations as well. But there are pre-made historiographies that you might be able to find on your topic. A direct approach for finding historiographies is to search the Troy Library online catalog. Use a keyword search term for your topic, combined with the subject search term historiography. Historiography, without the quotation marks, is a distinct Library of Congress subject heading that is LCSH. Combined with your keyword topic, it will lead you to books that specifically discuss what other historians have written on the topic. You can use the same approach in most library databases and in the big catalog called WorldCat that you can also access from the Troy Library databases. You can do a similar search in databases for journal articles, but when you do it there, truncate the word historiograph by adding an asterisk to it. Then you'll capture the words historiography, historiographic, and historiographical. Try this on Google Scholar too. Another database to search is Proquest Dissertations. Almost every dissertation and master's thesis has an entire chapter devoted to historiography on the topic. So just do a search on the topic itself and then look at the first or second chapters in some of the search results. But in reality, you're less likely to find what you want by searching for pre-made historiographies than you are by reading the historiographies and the lit reviews in books and articles that you've chosen to extract data from to use as evidence in your own papers. So when you're using a data-based book, pillage the bibliographies and mine the footnotes of those works to find other sources and then look at their interpretations as well as extract data from them. To sum up this lecture, we noted that your literature review was the end point of a process that began with the annotated bibliography, went through the reflective memo, and that you compiled those reflective memos into the concept saturation Excel dump. The literature review is a distinct section of your own research paper that addresses what other historians have said on your topic and adds your own engagement with them. We noted how historians use the word historiography to discuss both that topical literature, those reviews, and grand theories of history, and that you can tell the difference in the meaning from the context of how they use that word. We discussed approaching your own literature review like you would a group of historians talking around a water cooler, though operating through their written works. You first have to understand what they are saying, then repeat that to your readers. Sometimes you compare what two or more of them are talking about. Afterwards, you tell your readers how your ideas fit. You agree with one or more interpretations, you agree with one or more interpretations, you agree with a difference, or you find an area that they've not addressed as well as you can, that is a gap in the literature. Then you tell us what you think your evidence supports. Finally, we've talked about pre-made historiographies, that is literature reviews of what historians have written on a topic. Sometimes these are distinct articles or significant sections of books that you can locate by searching databases. You can also find smaller historiographies in the secondary sources you're using to extract data. For when those authors made their claims, they put those claims into the ongoing scholarly discussion on the topic. You can see what they engaged by reading their introductions. Want to find more? Pillage those works' bibliographies and mine their footnotes, just like you do when you're looking for data for evidence. This ends the lecture. As always, thanks for your attention.